is being scaled not just from ELA, but into math, science, and beyond. And so I know that we might not all be ELA people in the room, so I want to make sure that we think about how these IPGs are used to drive improvements as part of a continuous improvement cycle, which is something that you can use in any domain. My name is Bruce Billings. I'm the East Region ELA consultant. This is my 5th year in this role. And in that entire time, I've been working on HCRIME implementation. So my first day to work was essentially the last day in the office because they had shut it down due to COVID. So it's been an interesting few years, a lot of ups and downs, especially in ELA around implementation of new materials, particularly during a COVID year. But we're seeing a lot of progress, and the IPG has played a big part of that. So our agenda for today is we're going to do just kind of a general overview of an instructional practice guide. We're going to think about using an instructional practice guide, both for knowledge building and for foundational skills. ELA is unique in that we have 2 different IPGs. One is for K2 foundational skills, and the other, the knowledge building one, is for K12, which is content knowledge, so ELA content knowledge. We're also going to be talking about supports for just general implementation and learning for individuals who are going to be putting this into practice from a leadership perspective. So before we begin, I'd like to kind of get an idea of who's on the call. So in the chat, please put your name, role, and district. And we're going to begin. I'm going to ask that you come off mute and just quickly kind of tell us your name and what's your favorite part about a snow day. So we're going to start with that. It's a small group, so I'm hoping that we can have a more conversational back and forth for this session. Appreciate you all sharing. So we've got a pretty wide array of people represented on this call: CTE, ELL, we've got technology, school culture. So my challenge for you all is to be thinking about the applications, inside ELA classrooms, but also outside. Matthew Mosley, I know that from the CTE perspective, Danny Satterfield and Claiborne, he was like, I like that. I'm going to make my own. So he's got his own like CTE IPG.
We actually, he presented that to our East Region group of CTE directors. Danny presented his IPG tool, and it was amazing. It was great to see.
Mm-hmm. So that's going to be the name of the game today, is thinking about the crossover and also thinking about like leadership roles in terms of how do you support a shift in instruction, which is it's been a pretty heavy lift in terms of changing school cultures. So let's dig in. Let's see. So we're going to be talking about instructional practice guides, and you're going to be hearing me say IPG quite frequently. So instructional practice guides define the vision for strong instruction. And although it is typically used in core instruction, such as ELA and math, the indicators are important for any type of instruction that students receive. So a lot of times I've seen in the social studies world, people kind of take the ELA IPG and adapt it for that area. So strong core instruction is inclusive of all learners. That's going to be a big piece of this. And I know Jennifer, from the ELL perspective, there's been a big push for that inclusivity of all learners, and we'll touch on that in a little bit as well. I will also say that with the IPG, you're going to see some very familiar buckets in terms of how it's structured. So be keeping an eye out for that. So we're going to be looking specifically at ELA. Like I said earlier, we have 2 instructional practice guides, one for foundational skills that we use in pre-K through 2, and one for building knowledge that we use for pre-K through 12. We know that both of these are equally important to use, as they represent the 2 strands of the reading rope, which is essentially word recognition and language comprehension. So one without the other in K2 will not build a strong reader. It's really important to have both. So those K2 teachers, they really had some pretty big challenges in 2020 when they were asked to implement a new curriculum because they were asked to implement a new curriculum with two different key strategies to reading comprehension. And so they had to be very mindful of that. And there's been a lot of training that's gone out across the state to ensure that that is being taught in a way that allows kids to decode words rather than guess word meaning. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but I think for the majority of our time together, we're going to be talking about the knowledge building IPG as a whole. So the purpose for using an IPG, there's a variety of purposes, but one is going to be to norm on indicators for strong instructional practices. So this norming can occur at the teacher level, but also at the leader level, and it can occur from school to school. So one thing that we want to do is make sure that excellence is something that is scalable, and this is a tool for making that happen. It gives us a common language, and it gives us somewhat of an idea of what are our next steps for improving instruction as a group. We can use it as a monitoring tool. So if we say we want to make a change in ELA, this is a way to monitor that. A lot of our data kind of comes in that quantitative form, looking at standards. This is a way to kind of measure observational data and qualitative data. And so I know that districts have their own way to take an IPG form, input your ratings, and it shoots into like a Google form or a form stack, and you're able to generate quantitative data that way to monitor your progress across the year. It's a way to give feedback to teachers to provide quality next steps to improve instruction. With these content-specific IPGs, that feedback piece is becoming more relevant for school leaders and district leaders, in that the feedback is essentially content specific, whereas a team evaluation kind of lacks that specificity. And so a lot of districts, a lot of principals are blending these two into their areas of reinforcement and refinement. So using the language of team and also the IPGs, depending on whatever classroom they're in. So if they're in a math class, they can pull that math IPG and use some of that language to provide some specificity, some actionable items in terms of what are next steps for that teacher. And then finally, that last bullet is kind of a big one, but connect to an intellectual preparation cycle, including student work analysis. I'm curious, have you all heard the phrase intellectual prep cycle? And you can just say yes or no in the chat. Perfect. So I'm seeing some yeses, some nos, but essentially intellectual preparation, that was a change in vernacular with the new curriculum coming into classrooms. And there was a shift from planning to preparation. So planning was essentially, I'm kind of figuring out what I'm going to be teaching in the next 6 weeks. I've got to kind of build my own curriculum as I go. My first year teaching, I was handed a stack of novels and said, good luck. I didn't have any tests. I didn't have any worksheets. It was pretty trial by fire in the district that I came from. Now we have a curriculum where we want our teachers to prepare. So they need to read that curriculum ahead. They need to think about the application of it. It's more than reading a script. You really need to think about, have your students in mind. So the intellectual preparation cycle is that cycle of preparation, which is essentially backwards planning. We look at the unit as a whole. What are we doing in this unit? We look at the lessons to think about how does this lesson, apply in the context of an ELA classroom in our example today. And then we reflect on it through student work analysis, really thinking about what did my students get? What did they not get? So the IPG supports excellent literacy instruction in practice, and it's going to be organized in 4 very familiar buckets. The first being culture of learning, and that's going to be shared across content areas. So I can pretty much copy and paste that culture of learning domain and go into any classroom and kind of get a sense of, does this classroom have the enabling conditions for us to really engage in learning that is something that's perceived as safe for the students to engage in, and those students are held to a high expectation. Core action 1 is going to be content focused. So high quality instructional materials, high quality text, grade level text. That's an important piece to this knowledge building IPG. Core action 2 is teacher actions. Specifically, it calls out effective use of questions and tasks. And so we don't want to see kind of improvised questions and tasks. We want to see questions and tasks that are well planned and prepared, that leverage their materials and really get those students to engage in grade level activities. And then finally, core action 3 is student engagement. And so that is going to be, what are the opportunities for student engagement, and how does that look across the individual student experience? A lot of times you can go in and see a great classroom, but you might, if you step back and look, see that only 25% of the kids were really engaged. And so that core action 3 is a place where we're going to be thinking about, what does the engagement look like? So I'm going to pause here and show you kind of where these things are located. So you should see Tennessee Best for All Central. Michael, are you able to see that? I'm going to share the link here. So I'm going to ask that you go ahead and click that link. This is the Intellectual Preparation Hub, and I will go ahead and say I have a folder of bookmarks that are just Best for All Central links, because the search on here is notoriously bad. So you can see I've got it linked right there, Intellectual Prep Hub. So if you want to bookmark this, it's something that's referred back to quite frequently. And we're going to just keep scrolling down. We have those intellectual preparation cycle resources, but I want to go to the intellectual prep instructional practice guides here. So we're going to open that up. And one thing that you're going to notice, there's a second page. This was updated in November of 2024. So just 2 months ago, we've added core action 4, H crime access for all. And this was added mainly as a means to give us a more specific eye on how student subgroups are supported, student groups such as English learners, special students with an IEP, economically disadvantaged. And this is a pretty big state initiative that's happening right now, because we see upward trends in the general population. But when we look at student group populations, we're seeing kind of some stagnant data. And so this is a way for us to really look and see about, how well are those IEPs or ILPs enacted in the Tier 1 classroom. We're not going to talk about that today. So we're going to talk about core actions 1, 2, and 3. So this is what we're going to be looking at. All right, so let's dig into this. And in the chat, if you could give me a sense of what your familiarity is with the Tennessee Knowledge Building IPG. And Knox, I know you all have your own, so feel free to think about the Knox IPG. All right, so before we kind of begin, I'm curious, from those that said B or D, what's your sense of the IPG, and what would you kind of tell those that said A or B?
Will you ask that again?
I was going to say, for those that said they are generally pretty familiar or well-versed, what would you say to those that had put A or B about like what your understanding of the IPG is and how it applies in the classroom? So I'm looking at, Joe, Matthew Mosley, and Jennifer Long. You had said generally pretty familiar.
Yeah, I think when you start to unpack it, it actually provides a really good progression of measuring, those observational data points, as well as collecting more of that quantitative and qualitative data points. Um, it really gives a good structure to launch into conversation, especially when it comes to feedback for educational leaders at the administrative team level as well as the teacher level. So it just really provides the framework for those conversations, as well as recognizing and improving on instructional practices that are already taking place.
Thanks, Joe. So I will add here that Joe's right on with it. It kind of enhances some of the conversations that occur to be more instructionally minded. But that is a culture shift that you have to build. And I understand that in a lot of places, especially in ELA, we were kind of the first ones to really get into classrooms a lot more frequently. There is some apprehension from the teacher side with regards to, how come you're coming in so often? Why is it that you're giving me a rating of a yes, mostly somewhat not yet on something? And so it's going to be really important to think about the shift in culture. How do you ensure that the teacher perceptions of those who are being observed are included in how you communicate the application of this? And so really making it something that is reciprocal between the teachers and the leadership in terms of what you're bringing to the table. And so we're going to be looking at this, and we're going to notice that each of these has a rating system to it. And so it does feel evaluative. But we're not using this as an evaluation tool per se in terms of it's going on to your teacher evaluation. This is something that's used kind of like a formative assessment. We're using it to kind of guide our leadership so that we can make decisions about what are the key messages my teachers need to hear, what do we need to work in PLC, what type of feedback do I need to provide to make sure that we're continually improving our practices. So we've got some buckets here: culture of learning, correction 1, correction 2, and 3. And I want to make sure that we see one very key connection here, and that is going to be that we've seen these buckets before. Typically, we've seen something in the instructional triangle which shows content, teacher, and students as reciprocal interactions. The IPG reimagines that relationship. And so correction 1 is going to be content. That's our foundation. So the IPG is built hierarchically. If you don't have culture in place, it's going to be really hard to do grade level tasks in a setting and make sure all kids are engaged. The next foundational piece is going to be your content piece. From there, the next foundational piece is your teacher. What are the moves they are doing? From there, the students really come into play. And the question is, how are they engaged in the work? How do they engage with the teacher? How are they asked to perform those grade level expectations? So I want you to think about the instructional triangle rather than a reciprocal triangle. Think about a hierarchy. That's where the IPG is a bit different in terms of how we apply it in the school setting. So the culture indicators focus on the question, is the classroom environment inclusive and supportive while expecting engagement for all students? So I'll let you take a minute to read through the indicators. So based on the language of culture of learning, what is going to be the biggest takeaway for teachers and leaders in terms of what you should see and hear from the classroom in order to mark a yes?
If that's an open question, being the Department of School Culture here, this is what we do all the time. And it makes me think, have these things even been established to begin with? Are there expectations? Are the kids even know how to do any of these things? Have they been taught how to do any of these things? So, that's when I read those, that's the first thing, that's where my head went, because that's what we deal with a lot, tier one, behavior and, things like that. So.
I know newer teachers can struggle with this domain.
Yeah. Teacher school's not helping us out a whole lot these days.
Mm-hmm. So one is going to be behavioral. One is going to be kind of how that teacher manages the classroom. And I'll say too, beyond the management, does the teacher have high expectations for students? And so I don't want to spend too much on culture of learning, because I think we've all got some experiences in classrooms where we can walk in and in 30 seconds we have a good idea of whether or not it's a strong culture, or at least the culture isn't a holdback for student learning. And then we've been in classrooms where we're like, we need to work on some things here to ensure that this classroom is going to be something that is a positive experience for students. But this is the foundational piece. And so if there's a no here, that's where your feedback would lie. That's where your focus would lie. But if it's a yes, we continue to move on with the IPG and we look at the content. So you've got your IPG open, but you also have the PowerPoint here. I want you to take a minute to read and look through core action 1, high quality text. And when you're ready, drop a line in the chat that answers the question, and I'll copy it in here. Feel free to answer one or both of those. So what's standing out to you all in this domain? Feel free to type it or speak aloud. No.
I just look at the word, the meaningful information, and talking, I was talking about making school relevant and making these, again, being the culture guy, behavior guy. It's like, how are you making this meaningful to, 25 different kids and making it relevant? And
I was typing it out here, but it's easier just to say it. In my particular role, CTE director, it's, in participating in some of the IPG walks that I've done here in our various regions, it's helpful to, and what's something that we're continually working on, especially when we have teachers coming, straight from industry through CTE, or, ones that don't have an instructional background or even training really, but providing them a framework to be able to, rely on and use as a resource to help them learn what it means to be in a non-traditional classroom setting, but still adhere to what it means to be using, high quality materials and instructional practices. Just because it's, we don't have HQIM necessarily in CTE, but we do. It just may look a little bit different, and it may not be defined in the same way that ELA or math is, but That does not mean that there's not parallels that we can take, to help our folks in those different sorts of environments, if that makes sense.
I know that Knox, that you all have amended Core Action 1 a little bit. And I think it's either indicator C or D where you say high quality texts are at the center of instruction and the lesson plan is used with integrity or something like that. And so you're not only looking at the text, you're also looking at the lesson sequence. And so I want to note that that's something that is kind of missing here. If you look at the math IPG, it's in there. This was written kind of pre the curriculum implementation, and the original IPGs, they were a few pages long, and they included a qualitative and quantitative text analysis. Because what we were seeing was there was a lot of text being used in classrooms that were lower Lexile and lower quality. They weren't even grade level. And so that's why you see so much emphasis on text complexity here in indicators B and C. And then two, back to Matthew's point, A, it's, I mean, if we're in an ELA classroom, what's the one thing we need to have? Text. And so making sure that the majority of our time is spent reading, writing, and speaking about a text. And I saw Jennifer, I think it was you speaking about like having speaking be a big emphasis here. It is in the ELA standards. It's a giant chunk of the standards is speaking and listening, and that's going to be something so helpful for those English learner students, but also any student who may be behind in terms of what they can do with regards to grade level reading. Speaking is a great scaffold for writing, and so I love that they include that there as well. But the big thing here is that you got to have content. You got to have some sort of grade level expectation. We can't be teaching a third grade standard or a third grade text in a sixth grade class, because then we're not really engaging those kids. Once we get down to student opportunities in Core Action 3, they might be engaged, but the rigor has decreased so much that it's not really meaningful. I want to just say a few things here as well. With Core Action 1B, which says the anchor texts are at or above the complexity level expected for the grade and time of year, we might need to consider how are kids asked to engage in the text. So are they being read aloud to? Are they reading it independently? Are they reading it in pairs? How a student engages in the text changes the complexity. It's harder to independently read a text than to listen to a text. And so that's important. So a lot of times when you go in to look at ELA classes, you'll look at your curriculum to see what's the guidance here. Is it an independent read? Is it a whole class read? And if there's a teacher change, they might be over scaffolding, making it easier for the kids. And so we're going to move into Core Action 2, effective use of questions and tasks. But before we do, I wanted to say, looking at your curriculum, particularly the teacher guidance, is going to be very important for rating this. What I've seen in my own practice and also just in terms of working with a lot of different districts is your ratings will be inflated if you don't have some sort of place to compare. And our place to compare is the curriculum. And so looking at those lesson plans, getting acclimated to navigating them and seeing what's available there is going to be very helpful for making sure that we have high standards for a yes or a no. And I'll say this, if there's a teacher change, I always ask myself, was it a net positive or was it something that detracted from the student experience? I've seen so many teacher changes that were a net positive, but we were still within that integrity of the lesson. But then I've seen some changes where I've even asked the kids in the class, I said, was this something that was easy for you or was it challenging? And they said, that was so easy. And so like even the kids were aware that the rigor was reduced. All right, let's go to Core Action 2, effective use of questions and tasks. And I want you to go ahead and read through these indicators. And we're going to take a moment to talk about a little bit the differences between yes, mostly, somewhat, and not yet. So you're going to find a lot more content specific language here. And in terms of the application of this, your lesson plan is going to be your best friend in terms of being able to um, appropriately kind of rate this. I did say that I want to discuss kind of that yes, mostly, somewhat, not yet. The difference between a yes and mostly is less important than the difference between a mostly and a somewhat. Um, so what I mean by that is a lot of times when I'm having conversations, or anybody really, we a lot of times say, is it an upper bucket or lower bucket? Was that classroom a yes mostly, or was it a somewhat, not yet? The reason being, we don't want to really get into arguments about not yet versus somewhat when it's a lower bucket class. So you can use that language to kind of figure out where a classroom lands. And so we know that this is a qualitative observational rubric. It can be very challenging to kind of figure out, well, how many examples of text evidence do I have to have before I can say yes? And every ELA class is going to be different. They might only have one question that they're answering, particularly if they're writing an essay. That's one question. But you'll also see the teacher circulating. You'll be listening to hear the teacher kind of support kids one-on-one or in small groups. What are the questions that the teacher's giving those kids? And then you're going to have other lessons where there's a variety of questions that students are engaging with. Maybe they're doing a close read or they're doing a comprehension check. And so having those conversations with your observer partners is going to be really important here to really think about, what do we expect of high quality questions and tasks? And so going back to that norming purpose that we discussed earlier, it's really coming together as a group to think about, well, what is our expectation? And so as a state, we have this high expectation of ELA that's outlined in this IPG. There's times that you might have a TDOE partner in the classroom with you, or you've probably had people who have walked with us. And so, I've done walks with some of the staff in Knox for sure. And they've taken this IPG and really run with it, and they've done some great things with it. Do you have any questions about Core Action 2? This is everybody's favorite one. It's my favorite one as well, but Core Action 3. Everybody wants to start rating Core Action 3 student engagement. But again, this is a document that's built hierarchically. So if we don't have Core Action 1 or 2 above, we've really got to focus our attention up there. That being said, go ahead and read through Core Action 3. And I'll ask the group to come off mute and just tell me, what are the key characteristics you're seeing in Core Action 3?
This is more about, I think, understanding and comprehension, and being able to take that into application, I think.
Mm-hmm. Any other thoughts?
Students are analyzing and synthesizing.
This one's very interesting in that we see a lot of teacher poses, teacher expects, teacher cultivates. On the math one, they changed the language to be students, a little bit. I think they did. But we have teacher actions that promote student engagement and promote their own analysis of it, of text. You see different ways that the teacher pushes the kids to do the work. And so another way to frame this is, whoever's doing the thinking is doing the learning. So we want to see the students doing the learning. This is the only one that has a rating scale. You can see it at the top there. And it's a particularly not very helpful rating scale. So I'll tell you a better way to kind of frame this. When we're thinking about opportunities for student engagement, I would highly recommend thinking about a yes as 100% of the kids are engaged and they're doing that standards-based activity, whether it be speaking about the text, writing about the text, reading the text. Mostly would be 75%. So I've got a few students in the classroom who are able to kind of fly under the radar. They're not being engaged. Somewhat would be 50% of the class. And then a not yet would be I've got 25% of my class who is answering those questions. There's back and forth, but I've got the majority of my classroom really not engaged in the content. And so when I kind of break it down into those quartiles, it really helps me to think about the opportunities for student engagement and to make sure that no kid is kind of left behind in that respect. Okay. So we're going to be shifting to supporting all students in core action 2 and 3. So what are the look fors here? And the key here will be to use not only your materials effectively, but also to make good instructional decisions, because the materials aren't going to have everything, but they will have some things that say, you know, for our English language learners, you can do this, or for students who are struggling with this text, you can do this. Those are called access points. And so that first bullet, implementing the access points embedded in the high quality instructional materials, is an important step that's often overlooked by teachers. So an IPG observation might be the place where the observer can be the mirror for the teacher to be thinking about, you know, I noticed that you did the whole group lesson, but there was a few kids who were really struggling with this. You have this resource where you can use those access points to help those kids to get more engaged. And so access points are going to be an important part of that. There's other options here as well. I'll let you read through those, but the access points is probably the newest term, so I wanted to explain that. So making connections to the IPG and intellectual prep cycle. In core action 1 or core action 2, we want to see teacher using questions and tasks to reflect the depth of textual analysis required by grade level standards and integrate these standards in the service of building knowledge. That's the language from the core action 2 summary. What do you think teachers are going to have to do ahead of time to make sure that that happens? We're running out of time, so I'm going to just show you a few questions. So 1, your teacher should be reading and annotating the text. They should be asking themselves, what will students learn during this unit? How will students demonstrate this learning? What are the knows and the do's that students will need to master? Know being that knowledge that they acquire from the text. Do being the skill or the standard. So for example, do is, I'm going to write a persuasive essay. Knowledge is, I'm going to write a persuasive essay on a specific topic that I've learned about. So integrating that vocabulary and that knowledge in a way that shows that they have good comprehension. And then 4, how will the daily learning experiences build student understanding and skill? Engagement in that preparation process, engagement in those questions will help teachers better apply the curriculum in a way that will meet core action 2, yes, mostly ratings. So there's some best practices before walks for groups to leverage. And so 1, I know you're going to be doing this with groups at certain times, but essentially making sure you have a plan, communicating with teachers with regards to what you're looking for. That helps kind of build that relationship between observer and teacher, making sure that the teacher can be part of the solution process, and even using coaching questions rather than an evaluation. I very rarely would say, go ahead and rate the IPG and hand it back to a teacher. Best practice would be that IPG rating is information for the leader in terms of what their messaging is going to go back to them as. Another thing would be making sure that you have lesson materials on hand so that you can rate it more effectively. We've talked a little bit about that. During the observation, a lot of times what I do is I flip that paper over, I take my notes, I flip it back over, and I rate at the end of my observation. Observations are typically 15 to 20 minutes, and that is why it's not an evaluation. 15 to 20 minutes is not fair to a teacher. And so we're really just using this as a formative metric, a quick temperature check to see how are we doing. And when we do it enough times to see kind of multiple examples of this across the school, we can get a sense of where we're at as a group. And then after walks, you're going to debrief with your learning walk team. And so for you all, as you engage with this ELA IPG, this debrief is going to probably be the best learning you have. It's one thing to hear a PowerPoint, but it's another thing to actually talk about what we just saw. And so go in, be honest, and even push each other. Do you think it was a yes? Do you think it was a mostly, somewhat, or not yet? It's uncomfortable to have that judgment call, particularly on a teacher who you might not have a good relationship with, and you only saw a small chunk of their instruction. Go ahead and rate that. Yes, mostly, somewhat, not yet. It's not going on anybody's permanent record. It's a learning experience for you to really get an idea of what do we consider a yes. So that conversation will help with that. So I'm going to pause at this point, Michael. I know we didn't get as far as we wanted to. We had foundational skills on here, and it's built very similarly. And so if you want to take a look at that, go ahead and go back to that Intellectual Prep Hub link in Best for All. You've got the resource there. But essentially, how can the IPG be used in different roles? Different roles use it differently. And so we've got a few examples here, but feedback, that's going to be a big one. That can come from the district leader, school leader. And I would say it could even come from teacher leaders. It can be used as a norm for strong instruction. If you were to give the IPG to ELA teachers without TDOE on it, without the rating system on it, they'd probably agree. These are best ELA practices. And so again, we're trying to give language to the best practices and use that language to drive improvements. So I'm going to pause there. You can kind of see the rest of them that are there. Michael, I'll shift it back to you. If you all have any questions, I'll put my email in the chat, and you feel free to contact me. But I'm not going to. We got lunch to eat, so no. I'm going to pause there.
Well, I appreciate you coming in and presenting, Bruce, and providing your expertise in this area. So I want to be mindful of everybody's time. I'm just going to wrap up very quickly. Just a couple of things. Number one, as a reminder, if for some reason in the module it still says that you're doing 2, you're actually only doing 1 that's going to be recorded into the actual module itself. So just ignore that it says 2. Like I said, I went through them and it should have been adjusted, but just be aware of that. Something else too that you'll notice, when the modules were built, Core Action 4 wasn't on the actual knowledge building IPG at that point, because I know Bruce had indicated it was officially added, I think in November is what you said. And so it's not, Core Action 4 isn't in the module itself. So the only thing that's in the modules themselves are Core Actions 1, 2, and 3, and then obviously the culture of learning. So just be aware of that. Obviously, when you're going through and actually doing your learning walk, you should use the entire IPG holistically, because obviously there's a lot of value in that. But in terms of what's going into the module itself, it's built around culture of learning, and then Core Actions 1, 2, and 3. All right. Well, if there's any questions, you are more than welcome to ask. But if not, I really appreciate everybody being here. I appreciate your time. And I know that I really, really appreciate everything you do for our students and our teachers on a daily basis. You guys are, you guys are there really helping them out along the way. And so anything I can do to help, I will. But if not, I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday. Thank you all and have a great day.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, guys.
I appreciate you. Okay.
Michael. No problem.
All right. See you, Bruce.
See ya.
Hello, Anita. Can you hear me? Anita, can you hear me? Anita, just so you know, this was the oh, let's say yes, but I don't have access to my microphone or camera. Okay, perfectly fine. I just want to make sure you can hear me. So this was obviously the session for East Tennessee, and it just ended. The sessions are scheduled for an hour. Correct me if I'm wrong, you're Lawrence County, is that correct? Oh, Lebanon. So I know your typical session is uh is tomorrow. So yeah, I just want to let you know that this was the East one. It just been closed. You'll have to make sure that you click the link for your session because they're all individual links that lead to different meetings. Oh, no worries. Oh, that's fine. If you want, you can attend any of the other sessions. I understand. There is the session, obviously today at 12 o'clock Central. So that's the Southeast. So if you want, you can attend that one. All right, appreciate you. Oh, I'll say this. If you can't attend, if something happens and I know you're going to be out of office the rest of the week, I am working on a recording of this. And so I should have a recording of one of the sessions that I'm able to share to all the enrollees. And so if you can't attend, you can always use that to just review the information before you actually start the modules. Oh, you're welcome. I hope you have a great rest of your day if I don't see you at 12 o'clock.